Black smoke rises above the Atlantic. A cargo ship burns, listing sharply, men scrambling into lifeboats as freezing waves slap the hull. A German U-boat commander watches through his periscope, satisfied. Another Allied supply ship sinking. Another victory in the campaign to starve Britain into surrender. For a time, Germany believes this strategy will work. Britain depends on food, fuel, weapons, tanks, and planes carried across the ocean. If those ships never arrive, Britain collapses. The war ends without a single German soldier needing to invade its shores. In 1941, that outcome seems terrifyingly possible. Convoys are scattered, escorts are too few, and the ocean is endless. Each torpedo strike feels like a hammer blow to the Allied war effort. German sailors celebrate below deck, counting the tonnage they have sent to the bottom. Reports flow back to Berlin, filled with confidence. This is the future of warfare. Silent, invisible, unstoppable. But as flames from another sinking freighter reflect on the waves, a different scene begins far across the ocean. On the shores of the United States, sparks fly from steel plates. Shipyard whistles echo over the coastline. Thousands of new workers, men and women who have never built ships before, learn to wield torches and weld metal. It begins slowly. One ship every few weeks. Then one every few days. Then faster. German officers study intelligence reports and dismiss them. It seems impossible. They believe no nation can replace ships as fast as U-boats can destroy them. But the reports keep coming. Dozens of Liberty ships completed. Then hundreds. Then thousands. Each day brings more hulls rolling into the water. Factories never sleep. Cranes swing constantly. Steel arrives by the trainload. Welders press forward through heat and exhaustion. American industry is not defending. It is counterattacking. At sea, German commanders still fire torpedoes, still watch ships explode. But something feels wrong. New merchant ships appear faster than old ones can be sunk. Convoys grow larger. Protection grows stronger. The war they thought they could control is slipping away. Liberty ships are not elegant. They are not fast. They are not perfect. But they are the one thing Germany never expected its enemy to build. A fleet so vast that even the Atlantic itself cannot swallow it fast enough. This is the story of how America turned steel, sweat, and speed into a weapon Germany could not defeat, and how German officers were forced to confront a reality they never imagined possible. It did not begin in the American shipyards. It began in the cold waters of the Atlantic, where Britain struggled for survival. By 1940, Nazi Germany had conquered much of Europe. France had fallen. German aircraft bombed British cities nightly. The island nation stood alone, dependent on the sea for everything needed to continue the war. Every bullet, every tank, every sack of grain, every barrel of fuel, all of it had to cross the Atlantic Ocean. German U-boats understood this weakness clearly. They stalked shipping lanes like predators. Merchant ships exploded in sudden columns of fire and smoke. Radio operators sent desperate distress calls that faded into silence as crews perished in icy water. British leaders knew the truth too well. Lose the Atlantic and lose the war. Early in the conflict, the situation was dire. Convoys were poorly coordinated. Escort ships were too few to guard every route. Sonar technology was still limited. Aircraft could not provide cover across the entire ocean. German submariners celebrated what they called the happy time. They believed they were dismantling the British Empire one sinking ship at a time. Britain turned to the only nation that could produce enough ships to match the losses, the United States. But in 1940, America was not yet prepared for a shipbuilding war. Many shipyards still used methods from the previous century, slow, labor-intensive, reliant on highly skilled craftsmen. Traditional shipbuilding was like building a cathedral, one vessel crafted carefully over many months. That pace could never defeat Germany's industrial strategy at sea. British officials travelled to Washington with an urgent request. They needed cargo ships, hundreds of them, fast. President Franklin D. Roosevelt understood the stakes. He declared that America must become the arsenal of democracy. This was not about creating a navy of battleships. It was about ensuring Britain stayed alive. Orders flooded American industry. Factories retooled. Steel mills began working around the clock. Shipyard plans expanded far beyond anything previously attempted in peacetime. But the biggest challenge remained: how to build ships, not in months, but in weeks. This requirement led to bold decisions, unorthodox thinkers, and enormous risks. One of those bold minds was Henry J. Kaiser. Kaiser was not a traditional shipbuilder. He was not even trained as a naval engineer. His experience came from constructing roads, dams, and industrial megaprojects. He believed anything could be built faster with the right system and enough manpower. Where others saw slow craftsmanship, Kaiser saw assembly lines. Where others saw shortages of skilled workers, Kaiser saw the chance to train thousands of ordinary Americans. Where others saw complexity, he simplified. He did not ask how ships were built. He asked how ships could be built. Kaiser proposed a revolutionary model, dividing ship construction into prefabricated sections to be assembled like giant blocks. Build hull parts separately, bring them together by crane. Weld instead of rivet. Let hundreds of crews work at the same time. This approach mirrored the automotive assembly line, but scaled to ships hundreds of feet long. Traditional shipbuilders doubted him. Naval architects hesitated. Skeptics said ships would fall apart at sea. But the war did not allow caution. America needed results. So the U.S. Maritime Commission approved a new emergency ship design: simple, rugged, fast to produce. A standardized cargo ship of about 10,000 tons. Triple expansion steam engine. Enough speed to stay with convoys. Basic accommodations. No unnecessary features. It was originally a British concept called the Ocean Class, redesigned and renamed in America, the Liberty ship. Workers joked the design was so plain it looked like a bathtub with a deckhouse, but beauty was irrelevant. This was a ship built for one purpose: deliver cargo across the ocean faster than the enemy could sink it. Construction began at brand new shipyards, springing up along the coasts, places like Richmond, California, and Portland, Oregon. Vast facilities were carved from empty waterfront in months. Dormitories and cafeteria halls rose for the workers. Training schools opened to teach welding to thousands who had never touched a torch before. Men came from farms and factories. Women, previously barred from heavy industry, now put on helmets, boots, and gloves. Welders replaced riveters. Young workers learned through repeat practice. Speed increased daily. But the urgency only grew stronger. German submarines sank more ships every week. British food reserves dropped to weeks of supply, not months. History balanced on supply manifests and cargo manifests. The first Liberty ships launched slowly. The process was far from perfect. Some welds cracked, sections misaligned. Builders learned under pressure that every mistake delayed survival. German intelligence monitored American production with skepticism. Reports claimed the United States would drown in inefficiency. They believed U-boats could sink faster than America could build. At first, they were right. By mid-1941, losses still exceeded new ships entering service, but inside American shipyards, something unstoppable was forming. A rhythm of teamwork and innovation that accelerated with each launch. Teams discovered better ways to fit parts together. Foremen reorganized shift schedules. Cranes lifted heavier loads with greater precision. Training improved. Confidence skyrocketed. By the time Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941 and America entered the war fully, the industrial momentum was already set in motion. Now, the shipyards did not just build for Britain. They built for America's own war effort. They built for the world's survival. The first waves of Liberty ships began crossing the Atlantic, carrying tanks, trucks, aircraft, ammunition, oil, grain, and hope. Convoys, once vulnerable, started to swell in numbers. The ocean, once dominated by U-boats, now held fleets of newly constructed hulls, powering eastward against the wind. German commanders noticed something unnerving. They sank ships, as always, but their victory totals no longer made a difference. More ships appeared. More every month. More every week. The idea that America could build ships faster than Germany could destroy them was no longer just a theory. It was a fact. Soon, Japanese and German leaders realized what Britain understood first. The United States possessed industrial capacity unlike anything the world had ever seen. While U-boats prowled the ocean with fewer than 100 submarines at a time, America built hundreds of Liberty ships in a single year. Numbers were shifting the war's balance. Tonnage replaced tonnage. Losses became setbacks, not disasters. The Liberty ship was the unfinished promise of total industrial dominance, a promise soon to be fully realized, and the German naval command began to fear the future. Because America was just getting started, now that the foundation was laid, a storm of steel and workers would rise, and Germany would struggle to understand how fast their enemies could build a ship. At American shipyards, the pace did not simply increase, it transformed into a force of nature. Henry J. Kaiser's ideas spread from West Coast shipyards to the entire coastal industrial network. Where there had once been a handful of aging facilities, now stood massive production complexes glowing day and night. Welders wore protective masks under blinding arcs of light. Foremen shouted instructions over the roar of cranes. Steel plates moved like giant puzzle pieces sliding into place. Time became the enemy. Every hour mattered. Every minute wasted could cost lives across the ocean. Kaiser believed problems existed only to be solved. When skilled labor ran short, he hired and trained thousands of people who had never worked in heavy industry before. When housing for new workers became scarce, he built entire neighborhoods next to the shipyards. Hospitals, schools, recreation halls, everything needed to keep workers close to the assembly lines. Across America, a new type of workforce emerged. Women who once worked in kitchens now stood on scaffolding dozens of feet above the ground, sparks flying as they welded steel seams shut. African Americans, Mexican Americans, indigenous workers, and immigrants found opportunities long denied to them and proved their skill under the toughest conditions. Elderly men who had retired years earlier returned to contribute what they could. Teenagers lied about their age to join the war effort early. The Liberty ships were not built by one type of worker, they were built by everyone. And slowly, the world noticed. The first few ships took many weeks. Then weeks became days, shaved off each new build. By mid-1942, shipyards were launching Liberty ships faster than U-boats could sink merchant vessels. America had created a production system that Germany did not believe was technologically possible. Inside German naval headquarters, reports arrived that defied logic. A ship launched every 10 days. Soon, every 7 days. Soon, multiple ships a week from a single yard. German officers stared at charts that no longer favored them. Their mathematical victory sink faster than the enemy builds was collapsing. The U.S. Maritime Commission accelerated targets again. Workers took pride in breaking records. The goal was not just to build ships, it was to build them faster than yesterday. Ship christenings became weekly celebrations. Crowds gathered to watch a new hull enter the water, flags waving, bands playing, champagne bottles breaking against hardened steel. But there was no time to admire the ship for long. The next one was already waiting to replace its place on the slipway. Speed became identity. The shipyards grew louder, hotter, and more crowded. Assembly lines stretched like veins through industrial cities. There were setbacks. Some ships revealed cracks in their welded hulls, especially in the freezing Atlantic waters. Engineers responded immediately, adding reinforcements, redesigning stress points, adjusting welding standards. Problems were solved as fast as they were discovered. Failure was a teacher, not a signal to slow down. Thousands of engineers worked behind the scenes, refining the design continuously. Each improvement made the next ship faster, safer, more reliable. By late 1942, America was no longer catching up. It was pulling away. Britain and the Soviet Union relied on Liberty ships not just for survival, but for mobility and offensive power. Convoys arriving safely meant Allied operations could expand, push across new fronts, and regain territory lost earlier in the war. The Liberty ship did not fire guns at the enemy. It delivered the weapons that did. In Berlin, Admiral Karl Dönitz grew alarmed. He warned Hitler that U-boat warfare was losing its grip. He demanded more submarines, better technology, and new tactics. But while Germany re-engineered a few dozen submarines, America fabricated hundreds of cargo ships. Liberty ships even began to make headlines. They were photographed crossing the ocean loaded with Sherman tanks stacked like iron teeth. Soldiers waved from their decks, bound for Africa, Italy, and later the shores of Normandy. German sailors who once celebrated sinkings now stared in disbelief through periscopes as convoys stretched farther than the eye could see. And something else changed. Convoys were no longer quiet, fearful formations. They were guarded by destroyers with powerful radar and sonar. Aircraft flew overhead, ready to strike any submarine that surfaced too close. What once looked like helpless prey evolved into armored giants moving together across the sea. Shipping losses did not just slow, they plummeted. Meanwhile, the shipyards back home continued to evolve. Massive steel sections rolled on rails. Entire hull segments were attached by crane in single lifts. Workers offered suggestions daily that saved hours, then days, then weeks. The most important innovation was welding faster and simpler than time-consuming riveting. It allowed multiple crews to work freely at the same time. By 1943, the Liberty ship had become the most mass-produced ocean-going vessel in history. More than 2,000 already stood ready, with thousands more to follow. Factories competed fiercely. Workers boasted about beating other yards' launch speeds. It became a patriotic race of endurance, production, and national pride. German intelligence officers reported that something unprecedented was happening. Every time U-boats celebrated a sinking, 2 more ships were waiting to replace the loss. Hitler demanded explanations. His officers offered excuses. But the truth was terrifying. Industrial warfare had outgrown traditional military power. The German Navy had trained elite crews, refined tactics, and built machines of precise engineering. America countered not by matching sophistication, but by embracing volume, speed, and scale. War by numbers. War by output. War by endurance. The United States was proving that steel, when multiplied fast enough, could defeat even the most elite weapon. Cargo manifests became the front lines. Production schedules became battle plans. Shipyard workers became soldiers fighting a different kind of war. The Liberty ship was not perfect. It was not glamorous. It did not inspire awe with its appearance. But every one of them was a promise kept, a ship that delivered the materials of survival before a German submarine could steal that hope away. And across the Atlantic, German officers began to understand something they feared admitting. They were no longer fighting a nation. They were fighting an industrial giant that could not be stopped. The story was shifting. The underdog, Britain once protected, became the supplier of strength. The weakness Germany exploited was turning into overwhelming force. Because every day, every shift, every welding spark meant one more ship entering the Atlantic, and one more step toward a war Germany could no longer control. Now the narrative moves deeper into the human and technological angles, where the people inside these shipyards and the men watching from Germany reveal just how shocking this industrial revolution truly was. The shipyard gates opened before sunrise. Workers poured in from buses and trucks, lunch pails in hand, boots still damp from the morning dew. The whistle blew, sparks erupted. The sound of grinding steel and hammering filled the sky. Every day felt like a battle fought with tools instead of rifles. Inside these shipyards, urgency was a living presence. Supervisors watched the clock as closely as any officer on a battlefield. Every second mattered. One delay could mean a convoy sailed with fewer ships, or that supplies arrived too late to save a soldier in a distant land. The war was not only fought in trenches or on the seas, it was fought here, in the clanging heat of industrial America. Men and women learned quickly that shipbuilding at this scale meant adapting constantly. They solved problems on the spot, adjusting angles on steel plates, shifting cranes an inch at a time, customizing fixtures when standard ones failed. Ingenuity became routine. Workers who never finished high school discovered they possessed engineering instincts that saved days of labor. Kaiser and his leadership enforced a simple philosophy: if you see a better way, speak up. The old hierarchy of experience and craft gave way to a new structure built on efficiency, experimentation, and trust. Welders could suggest improvements. Sheet metal workers pointed out small design changes that sped up assembly. Thousands of micro-innovations combined to create a production revolution. The Liberty ship was the product of these minds working together under pressure. It was simple by necessity. Straight lines over curved surfaces. Fewer specialized parts. Components prefabricated far from shipyard steel frames arriving from inland factories. bulkheads made by automotive suppliers, pipe sections constructed in assembly sheds. When one job finished, another immediately began. There was no pause. Workers rotated shifts, so assembly lines never stopped. The shipyard lights glowed through the night. Steel beams cast long shadows on the ground as new hulls took shape in the darkness. Inside cafeteria halls, workers rested briefly between shifts. They ate quickly, boots muddy from the yard, hands streaked with grime and grease. Then they returned to the sounds of cranes, welding torches, and the occasional celebration when a major section fit perfectly into place. Pride built faster than the ships themselves. The Liberty ship symbolized the energy of a country united by necessity. A single ship required nearly every industry: mining, logging, cotton mills, oil refineries, tool makers, electrics, rail transport. America's geography became a logistical weapon. Steel from Pittsburgh traveled to the coasts. Engines from the Midwest were installed in California or Virginia. The entire nation, farms to factories, pushed each ship into existence. It was not easy. Welding demanded steady hands and hours of repetitive precision. Machines broke. Weather slowed progress. Exhaustion lingered in every limb. But workers knew why they were there. Many had family members overseas fighting. Every Liberty ship completed meant those soldiers received the support they needed. Every launch ceremony reminded them. Flags draped over the bow, families cheering as the hull slid into the water. A christening bottle shattered, a roar of applause, and seconds later, work resumed, because another ship waited to take its place. Production speeds increased beyond what even Kaiser imagined. Some workers joked that they built ships faster than they could memorize their names. Welders moved from one hull to the next, hardly looking up. The question was no longer whether they could build fast enough. It was whether Germany could understand what they were up against. Across the ocean, German naval officers studied the numbers carefully. They monitored merchant shipping output. Intelligence operatives gathered estimates of shipyard expansion. Reports soon showed building schedules that seemed impossible. German analysts requested verification again and again. Could Americans truly launch ships weekly? Could they really sustain such an insane pace? Diaries and captured documents later revealed disbelief. Some German officers laughed when first hearing that a single yard planned to produce hundreds of ships. They considered the projections propaganda, but as months passed, the truth grew irrefutable. The sinking statistics no longer outpaced the launching statistics. For every torpedo success, multiple Liberty ships arrived to replace the losses. The war of numbers was changing. For the first time, U-boat commanders questioned whether their victories mattered. They risked everything for each sinking. They celebrated each explosion. Yet each ship destroyed barely scratched the Allied supply chain anymore. Germany's strategy depended on denial. America answered with abundance. It became clear that this industrial force did not depend entirely on experienced labor. Women stepped into roles previously reserved only for men. They learned to weld, operate cranes, drive rivet guns, and measure steel tolerances. Many had never imagined themselves in overalls, faces darkened with dust, climbing across scaffolding high above the ground. Yet they thrived. Rosie the Riveter became a national icon, but there were thousands of real Rosie's women who left homes and offices to join the war effort in the most direct way they knew. Building the ships that kept freedom alive. For women, the shipyards brought independence and purpose. They earned wages equal to responsibilities men once monopolized. They commanded respect for the skills they rapidly mastered. They felt the pride of knowing each section they welded would soon sail into danger, carrying the supplies needed to liberate nations. The shipyards transformed society, not just the war. Families reorganized, schools adjusted schedules, communities formed around factories instead of quiet residential streets. New friendships formed inside noisy workshops, between people who never would have met in ordinary times. The war forced America to rethink who could do what, and the answer was simple: anyone willing to work hard enough. German intelligence failed to predict this cultural shift. They underestimated a nation's ability to mobilize every citizen. They did not imagine that workers with no maritime background could master complex steel structures. They believed skill was inherited or trained over years. America proved skill was also born from necessity. Technology strengthened this transformation. Riveting, once the standard method of ship assembly, took too long. Welding was faster, cheaper, and required less specialized training. It became the heartbeat of shipbuilding. Torches sparked in daylight and glowed in darkness. Welders connected massive steel sections with surprising speed. 1,000 seams at once, tightening the skeleton of each new ship. This speed brought risks. Welded hulls reacted differently in freezing waters. Engineers documented cracks that could spread dangerously fast. The problem forced rapid refinement of metal treatment and design adjustments. Kaiser's teams attacked the solution without delay, reinforcing critical areas and distributing stress more evenly. What could have been a fatal flaw instead became another victory for collaboration and quick thinking. Steel was only one part of the challenge. Engines needed to run reliably for weeks at sea. Navigation systems had to be installed perfectly. Electrical lines snaked through the hulls like veins. Ventilation systems were essential to prevent suffocating conditions inside cargo holds. Every component required inspection under tight deadlines. Quality was watched closely, because a rushed mistake could cost lives in the middle of the ocean. Workers understood this. They did not cut corners. They cut time, and that distinction made all the difference. As American yards celebrated their achievements, Germany struggled with its own production. Fueled shortages, bombings, and political interference slowed progress. U-boat crews waited impatiently for replacements. Many submarines returned, severely damaged. Repairs took longer than expected. Pressure mounted on Dönitz to explain how his once unstoppable force was losing ground faster than it could recover. His officers pointed to the same truth. America had changed the scale of war. U-boat captains reported convoys larger and better protected. Merchant ships replaced faster than they disappeared. More escorts, more aircraft, more everything. The ocean that once offered sanctuary and targets in equal measure now delivered only frustration. What frightened German observers most was not the number of new ships, it was how quickly the number grew. The Americans were building ships with the same rhythm that factories built automobiles. The war was no longer about battleships and submarines, but about logistics and endurance. The side that supplied the most would endure the longest, and the side that endured the longest would win. Every Liberty ship, sliding down the launchways into the water, sent a message across the Atlantic. Germany could no longer starve its enemies into submission. Factories in America felt unstoppable. The shipyards reflected a national mood, confident, determined, and accelerating. They built ships faster with each passing month, breaking their own records repeatedly. German officers saw the writing on the wall. Their U-boats were impressive machines with elite crews, but they could not sink ships at the pace America built them. The balance of power in the Atlantic was shifting from stealth to sheer numbers. The Liberty ship represented that transformation more clearly than any other vessel of the war, and the workers who forged, welded, and launched them understood what they were truly creating. Not just steel hulls, but a lifeline strong enough to pull a continent back from the edge. The story now turns even sharper, as German shock turns into desperation when America builds Liberty ships at record-breaking speeds Germany once believed were impossible. German naval intelligence continued to receive reports they wished were false. Output estimates from American shipyards kept rising. Month after month, the numbers climbed. In Berlin, officers studied the charts in stiff silence. The U-boat war depended on sinking merchant ships faster than they could be built. That equation, once in Germany's favor, was now collapsing. At sea, U-boat crews noticed the change before their commanders did. Convoys they shadowed seemed endless. Ships filled the horizon. Escorts prowled more aggressively. Every time they fired a torpedo, they risked immediate retaliation from destroyers equipped with sonar and depth charges. Even when a merchant ship sank, the victory seemed hollow. They would later learn why. That loss, in the time it took to announce it over radio, was already replaced by a new Liberty ship leaving an American port. Diaries recovered after the war show disbelief and frustration. Officers wrote that the ocean felt different, as though the enemy multiplied in silence. One U-boat captain described watching an entire convoy stretch so wide he couldn't count the ships in range. Another wrote that for every hull he destroyed, 100 more seemed ready to take its place. The U-boat command measured war in tonnage sunk, the Allies measured it in tonnage delivered, and America delivered more each year. The mathematics were merciless. German crews placed themselves in mortal danger for results that now barely dented the Allied lifeline. The German naval staff did not simply accept the data. They doubted their spies. They questioned the accuracy of aerial reconnaissance. Could America really launch ships every few days? They searched for flaws. They searched for loopholes. But in the end, they could not deny what was happening. U.S. shipyards were producing at a speed that defied previous understanding of industrial limits. Meanwhile, the Liberty ships themselves proved tougher than critics expected. They were designed for one purpose: deliver cargo. They did exactly that, again and again, across thousands of miles of dangerous ocean. Their crews often included civilians, many with limited military experience. Yet these ships traveled through submarine-infested waters with a calm practicality that impressed hardened naval officers. Convoys protected them well, but some Liberty ships survived attacks entirely on their own. There were stories of severely damaged ships staying afloat long enough to be towed to safety. Engineers noted that the welded hulls, despite early cracking problems, held up remarkably well under intense pressure. Their steam engines, simple and reliable, could be repaired in nearly any port. A Liberty ship could take a beating, deliver its cargo, and return for more. German commanders observed a dangerous trend. Liberty ships were not only replacing sunk ships, they were expanding Allied logistical power far beyond pre-war levels. The U-boat fleet now fought an opponent whose strength grew faster in combat than outside it. Every torpedo fired was a temporary impact, but every torch in a shipyard was a permanent solution. The ships carried everything a war required: jeeps stacked like building blocks, crates of rifles, mountains of ammunition, fuel barrels lashed tight, radar equipment, aircraft parts, canned food, spare uniforms, medical supplies, the materials that turned desperate resistance into advancing armies. Without those deliveries, battles on distant shores would never have begun. North Africa would not have seen American tanks rolling across the desert. Italian mountains would have remained impassable. The skies over Europe would not have darkened with Allied bombers. And one day, in June 1944, the beaches of Normandy would not have seen the largest invasion in history. The Liberty ship may not have fought directly, but victories followed in its wake. German officers once took pride in torpedoing the backbone of Allied power. Now they realized that backbone was regenerating faster than they could break it. Every sinking pulled the enemy backward for a moment. Every Liberty ship pulled them forward forever. Propaganda officers in Berlin attempted to reassure the public that the U-boat campaign still held strength. They celebrated tonnage figures on the radio, but these broadcasts could not hide the shifting truth from those at sea. U-boat crews saw more escorts, more aircraft, more steel in the water than ever before. Survival became harder. Successful missions became rarer. They sensed they were losing control. Rising losses forced experienced commanders to make impossible decisions. Torpedo reserves dwindled. Fuel ran low. Damaged submarines needed weeks of repair. Crews with declining morale stepped onto docks in silence, unsure if their next voyage would be their last. Even when Germany introduced technological improvements, they arrived too late to reverse the tide. U-boats gained snorkels, allowing longer submerged travel, but escorts adapted quickly, and radar still found periscopes cutting the surface. New torpedoes launched with advanced triggers, but production slowed under Allied bombing. The net was closing around the submarine fleet, and it tightened further with every Liberty ship launched. American shipyards established production records once thought impossible. A ship built in 10 days, then 8, then 5, and in one remarkable, symbolic breakthrough, a Liberty ship launched in just 4 days and 15 hours. German intelligence analysts stared at this number with disbelief. How could a vessel hundreds of feet long, weighing thousands of tons, be assembled faster than many nations could even approve construction plans. Each new record shook German confidence deeper. Naval officers tried to reassure themselves that quality must suffer under such speed. But the ships kept crossing the ocean. They kept delivering supplies. They kept returning again and again. In the minds of German leaders, something terrifying emerged. America was not fighting a normal war. It was transforming warfare into an unstoppable industrial phenomenon. The United States was proving that mass production, when applied to logistics, could be as deadly as any weapon system. Liberty ships represented a new type of power, a nation's ability to outproduce its enemy into defeat. The German submarine fleet, once seen as the weapon that would strangle Britain, now struggled to survive its own missions. Some crews never even saw their targets. Aircraft forced them to dive early. Destroyers hunted relentlessly. Sonar operators listened for the faint hint of propellers. And above them, another convoy sailed undisturbed, filled with Liberty ships carrying the supplies that fueled the Allied advance. Every failure echoed back to German high command. They demanded more aggression from U-boat captains, but aggression only brought more destruction. They demanded new tactics, but tactical innovation could not keep up with the flood of steel that filled the sea. In desperation, Germany began focusing submarine efforts on more isolated routes. But these changes barely slowed the flow of supplies. The Liberty ship's strength was not in any single convoy, it was in the unstoppable scale of production behind it. Workers in American shipyards did not know the names of those reading German intelligence reports. They did not hear the frustration inside U-boat communications. They did not witness the alarm spreading through the Kriegsmarine. They only understood that they needed to keep working. They understood that the war ended faster if the ships launched faster. They did not need medals or headlines. Each ship sliding into the ocean was their victory, and they celebrated it by starting the next one. The war that Germany believed it controlled was slipping away beneath a tide of industrial determination. The Liberty ship turned the battlefield against them, not with guns, not with armor, but with speed and endless supply. Soon, the pressure would force a critical shift. Germany would push for a final attempt to reclaim the Atlantic through intensified U-boat attacks. And America would answer that escalation with record-breaking construction that would redefine the meaning of industrial power in war. The climax of this story begins when Liberty ships are launched so fast, Germany can hardly count them before they reach the open water. The pressure built slowly at first, then all at once. German naval strategy relied on a single belief, that submarines could starve the Allies into submission faster than the Allies could react. But the Liberty ship program had outgrown that theory. Reports from the U.S. Maritime Commission warned that the next goal would push the limits of what anyone thought possible. Kaiser wanted to build ships in days, not weeks. This was not a boast. This was a deadline. To reach that speed, shipyards redesigned assembly lines again. Workstations moved closer together. Prefabrication increased. Workers trained each other on faster methods. Engineers simplified tasks wherever a step slowed progress. One change improved another, and soon entire procedures transformed. Every shipyard competed to break records. Newspapers printed launch times as though they were sports results. Citizens followed the race with excitement. Factory walls held charts tracking hours saved per vessel. The country cheered each improvement. In March 1942, a new target was set. A Liberty ship built in 10 days. The idea sounded absurd, but within months, a ship did launch in just over 10. Then another broke that mark. Then more followed. America kept accelerating. Liberty ships slid down the ways like a steel waterfall. The sight stunned observers. Ships built with such urgency that nobody stopped to marvel because the next one waited. German intelligence reported launch dates with disbelief. If their analysts could track every ship completed, they needed maps larger than entire walls just to plot them. Naval officers gathered around briefing tables, staring at charts showing the U-boat fleet sinking ships at a fast pace, but watching the Allied merchant fleet grow even faster. Then, in November 1942, one shipyard decided speed alone was not enough. They wanted history. They wanted to prove that German assumptions meant nothing. Kaiser's team prepared for a demonstration, a record so extreme that it would silence any doubt about American production power. The hull that would make that statement was given a name, SS Robert E. Peary. Workers prepared sections long before the first keel plate was laid. Cranes stood ready, torches fueled. Crews performed drills like soldiers preparing for battle. Everyone knew this ship was not just steel, it was a message. The goal was to launch the ship in just a few days, not weeks. When construction began, every shift worked without pause. Men and women rotated as though the shipyard itself never slept. Parts arrived on rail lines perfectly synchronized. Foremen shouted numbers, calling for the next components. The hull rose with unbelievable speed. Welding sparks looked like fireworks as crews raced against time. The Atlantic War's future hung on clocks ticking inside American shipyards. Watch, report, and tool call information. The German observers soon noticed. Intelligence officers received coded messages describing the speed of SS Robert E. Peary's assembly. They thought it was a mistake. They waited for corrections. They received confirmation instead. The launch was scheduled just over 4 days after construction began. In those days, German submarines sank ships the old way through deadly precision. But America built ships the new way through unstoppable force. The Peary slid into the water after only 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes of work. The world stopped and stared. Photographs captured the moment, a shipyard crowd screaming with joy as the hull hit the water. A record that shattered expectations and terrified German analysts. They calculated the implications. If America could build ships in 4 days once, they could do it again. And if they did, the U-boat fleet was doomed. Captain commanders at sea read summaries of the launch. Some refused to believe them. Others felt the weight of a battle slipping beyond reach. One officer later wrote, "If this is true, our war is already lost." Admiral Dönitz understood the danger immediately. He ordered a renewed assault on shipping lanes. U-boats were to strike harder and faster than before. They were to hunt Liberty ships relentlessly. Germany would not lose its greatest advantage without a terrifying fight. The sea turned violent. Submarines fired torpedoes day and night. Convoys shuddered under impact. Flames rose again across the waves. Sailors died in shocking numbers. The U-boat war reached its deadliest stage. But the impact that once devastated the Allies now barely held the line. For each Liberty ship that vanished beneath the surface, another or several replaced it within weeks. What Germany saw as victory became only a brief delay. Convoy after convoy continued to cross the Atlantic. Allied supplies flowed in unstoppable currents. Tanks rolled across desert battlefields in North Africa. Aircraft filled British skies. Guns fired on Eastern front lines. Food reached starving cities. Every Liberty ship delivered more than cargo. It delivered time. Time for Allied armies to plan. Time for air forces to strike. Time for invasions to form. German officers who once believed they held the winning strategy now realized they were trapped in a losing arithmetic. Meanwhile, in the shipyards, the pressure only increased. The Peary was not the end, it was the beginning of a new standard. Crews asked, "How fast can we go next? Can we shave another hour? Another shift? Can we fit a full hull over a weekend?" Each question brought improvement. Each improvement widened the gap Germany had to close with submarines that could not be built or repaired fast enough. Morale soared in American factories. New welders joined daily. Veterans trained them in hours what had once taken weeks. Efficiency became instinct. German reports carried a tone of alarm no submarine victory could hide. Their greatest fear was confirmed. The enemy now outproduced them in every dimension. They could neither destroy ships fast enough, nor replace lost submarines quickly enough. The tipping point arrived quietly. German U-boat captains listened through their hydrophones, hearing the loud hum of convoy engines overhead. They tried to close in. They tried to fire torpedoes. But destroyers pounced on any hint of movement. The hunters had become the hunted. U-boat crews who once surfaced triumphantly now submerged out of fear. The numbers of submarines sunk rose. The number of convoys stopped fell. Germany's navy, which sought to choke the ocean, now struggled for oxygen beneath it. At this stage, Admiral Dönitz faced a brutal truth. The belief in victory through tonnage war sinking merchant shipping had failed. He demanded more boats that could no longer be built. He sent orders for aggressiveness that cost more crews their lives. The heart of his strategy beat weaker each month, but even then, German newspapers printed victories. They listed tonnage sunk as though numbers alone could hide the truth that the Allies were winning the future. Secrecy hid all the wrong things. The fear inside U-boats, the records broken in American shipyards, the realization that Liberty ships were not temporary solutions, they were overwhelming answers. This was the turning point. The battle no longer balanced on hope but on production, and production had chosen a side. After the launch of the SS Robert E. Peary, the U-boat commanders no longer questioned if America could build ships faster. They questioned whether it mattered how many they sank at all, because now the Atlantic War was a countdown, and every Liberty ship shortened Germany's time left to fight. The climax continues as Germany throws everything into a final gamble to break the Atlantic lifeline, and America responds with unstoppable industrial force. U-boats moved through the dark waters as silently as shadows. Each patrol now carried a heavier burden. The mission was no longer to strike confidently and slip away. It was to stop a flood with too few hands. The German commanders ordered maximum effort. Seek convoys, strike repeatedly, ignore all risks. Even if a submarine did not return home, the officers believed they had to inflict enough losses to slow the American advance. But the ocean had changed. It was no longer a hunting ground. It had become a battlefield where every German move was watched. Escort ships travelled with aggressive precision. Aircraft circled above like hawks, scanning the surface. Convoys spread across the sea in formations so carefully defended that submarines rarely found openings to attack. When a torpedo struck a Liberty ship, the explosion did not feel decisive the way it once had. The flames lit the sky, the ship listed and submerged, but the victory had already been replaced by a new hull sliding into the Atlantic back in America. Each success felt smaller. Each sinking now hurt Germany more than the Allies. German crews still fought bravely. They descended into the depths when detected, waiting as depth charges rolled off destroyer rails. The blasts shook steel, tossed men against equipment, and filled compartments with choking smoke from stressed wiring. But any relief from a failed attack was brief, because the pursuit continued. Destroyers no longer gave up after a few passes. They stayed until the target disappeared one way or another. Every day that passed, more Liberty ships sailed under the protection of more escorts than the day before. For the first time, U-boat captains wrote in logs that their missions were nearly impossible to complete successfully. They saw the truth unfolding around them. Germany was losing the Battle of the Atlantic not by defeat in combat, but by defeat in production. Meanwhile, American shipyards pushed speed beyond the extraordinary. They no longer needed to launch record ships in 4 days to prove anything. They only needed consistency, and they had achieved it. Dozens of hulls entered the water each month from each major yard. The number 2,710 had not yet been reached, but the trajectory was unstoppable. The supply lines became not just stronger, but overwhelming. Convoys carried enough equipment to equip entire armies. A single convoy could contain the power to change a front line. Every Liberty ship sailed with the strength of thousands of civilians who had built it. Their hands, their precision, their hours all travelled within the steel frames. The results finally appeared on battlefields everywhere. In North Africa, German forces retreated. In Sicily, Allied troops gained ground. The Red Army, supplied in growing part by American cargo, held strong in brutal winter battles. The war no longer moved only by strategy, it moved by shipping schedules. By mid-1943, German admirals understood something they never wished to admit. The war at sea had reached a point of no return. They urged Hitler to change direction, to invest in air and surface escorts, to shift resources away from submarines. But Hitler remained fixated on the U-boat campaign that had once promised victory. He demanded more sinkings. He demanded aggressive tactics that would only lead to more U-boats lost. The submarine fleet obeyed, but each new surge only drained its own strength further. The crews became younger, less experienced, and more frightened. Morale slipped into silent resignation. Reports of destroyed convoys became rare. Reports of missing submarines became common. Families in Germany waited for news, none came. The sea did not return its dead. Admiral Dönitz stood before the numbers in disbelief. He had insisted that submarines could stop America's industrial mobilization. But America had grown stronger than his calculations. He once believed that 10 U-boats could sink enough ships to starve an island. Now 1,000 submarines could not sink enough to slow a continent. The truth struck hardest when German intelligence finally accepted the scale of American industry. Factories were building not only Liberty ships, but the escorts that protected them, the planes that guarded them, the tanks they carried, the ammunition they delivered. Germany was fighting against a nation that could construct an entire army, every piece of it, while still expanding its industrial base. The climax of the Battle of the Atlantic came quietly, with a shift in numbers that could not be denied. Sinkings decreased dramatically. Convoys crossed safely in patterns once considered suicidal. The ocean lanes belonged to the Allies again. U-boat commanders now faced a grim future. Their patrols ended more often in destruction than triumph. Many submarines vanished without a single radio message explaining why. Survivors described feeling hunted constantly. Each dive that protected them also trapped them. Pressure built on metal and morale. The depth of the ocean no longer protected them. It waited to crush them. Meanwhile, Liberty ships delivered the final proof of strategic victory. In the years ahead, these ships would carry the equipment that stormed Normandy beaches. They would bring the supplies that pushed across France. They would deliver everything needed to end the war in Europe, all because they existed in numbers that Germany could not match. The Germans, who once believed themselves unstoppable, now saw the future. They were trapped in a war paced by machines, and the Americans built faster. They could not sink factories. They could not torpedo assembly lines. They could not strike at millions of workers welding steel into survival. The ocean did not lie. The ocean recorded every result, and that record stated clearly, the U-boats had lost. The tonnage war, the heart of German naval strategy, was finished. The climax of this story does not come from one dramatic battle at sea. It comes from the moment Germany realized that even success meant nothing. When a nation builds ships faster than they can be sunk, the battle is already decided. Liberty ships did not win through heroics. They won through thousands of ordinary people doing extraordinary work repeatedly until the enemy understood he could not win. And as German submarines limped home or disappeared forever beneath the waves, Liberty ships sailed confidently toward their next destination, loaded with what would soon deliver final victory. The ocean that once threatened Britain now carried the power to liberate Europe. Germany could no longer stop it. The story now turns toward consequences, how this unstoppable production crushed the heart of German strategy and reshaped the future of naval warfare. The war at sea did not end with a single announcement. It ended when Germany could no longer deny what every sailor already knew. The Battle of the Atlantic was lost. The reason was not hidden in code or decided by a single naval engagement. It was written in the steel of thousands of Liberty ships crossing the ocean without pause. Convoys no longer prayed to slip through danger. They sailed with growing confidence. Sonar-equipped escorts guarded them with deadly efficiency. Aircraft scanned the waves where U-boats once surfaced freely. Cargo deliveries became reliable again. Britain no longer teetered on starvation. It stood ready to join the fight against Germany on equal strength. Behind every convoy stood the welding torches and cranes of American shipyards. Merchant sailors who once feared the dark shapes beneath the waves now trusted in numbers, shipments so vast that even losses could not slow them. The ocean route transformed from a lifeline under siege into a highway of victory. For Germany, the consequences were immediate and irreversible. Their submarine fleet, once the pride of the Kriegsmarine, now carried the burden of catastrophic losses. About 3 out of every 4 submariners would never return home. Thousands of young men vanished into the deep, with no graves of stone or earth, just rusting wrecks scattered across the seabed. Admiral Dönitz was forced to confront reality. His once powerful strategy of cutting supply lines had become suicide for his crews. The enemy had simply changed the terms. The Allies no longer fought the same war Germany had prepared for. They fought with factories and manpower that outpaced engines and torpedoes. Meanwhile, Liberty ships kept multiplying. Each new hull launched represented more food delivered, more ammunition supplied, more tanks delivered to front lines growing bolder. War planners calculated that without Liberty ships, no Allied offensive could sustain momentum. With them, every offensive had a foundation. The numbers proved it clearly. 2,000 Liberty ships launched, then 2,500, then over 2,700 by the end of the war, a fleet born entirely from necessity. Their sheer presence overwhelmed strategy, overwhelmed fear, overwhelmed every torpedo fired in desperation. German leadership understood that if they wanted to slow the Allies again, they needed to destroy the shipyards themselves, the heart of America's power. But those shipyards were thousands of miles from Europe, out of reach of submarine attacks. They remained untouched engines of war. American workers never saw battlefields, but they reshaped them. Their hands delivered the capability to open new fronts. Their effort transformed a desperate defensive war into a relentless march forward. German officers who once bragged about sinking ships now questioned the point. They could no longer measure success in tonnage lost by the Allies. They had to measure it against tonnage delivered, and in that calculation, they were defeated long before they admitted it. The Liberty ship program became a practical demonstration that industrial strength was itself the greatest weapon of the war. It did not rely on speed at sea, but speed in production. It did not rely on heroics, but endurance. It overwhelmed the enemy not with power in combat, but with consistency. While U-boats dove deeper into ocean trenches to hide from sonar, more ships rolled into the water from American slips. It was a battle Germany could not stop, and by 1944 no longer tried to. This was not just the end of a naval strategy. It was the end of Germany's ability to control the outcome of the war. The Liberty ships did not stop sailing when the U-boats stopped fighting. They continued across oceans long after peace returned. Their hulls, built in urgency and tested in war, adapted to the world that emerged from the ashes. Many ships continued carrying goods through the late 1942 and 1952, part of a new global economy America helped rebuild. Some Liberty ships joined humanitarian missions, transporting food to starving populations in Europe and Asia. Others were purchased by international shipping companies, their wartime grey replaced by civilian colours. They carried coal, timber, cars, and grain, turning weapons of survival into engines of recovery. War had demanded speed and quantity. Peace demanded durability and reach. Liberty ships proved they could deliver both. A portion of the fleet served in new conflicts as well, carrying United Nations forces during the Korean War. Their engines, simple but reliable, roared again in the cause of containing new threats. The ships that once raced to defeat fascism now sailed to prevent the spread of war in another part of the world. Not all Liberty ships survived. Some were scrapped when newer, faster vessels replaced them. Some ran aground in storms. Some quietly sank from old age. But many continued to exist for decades, living second and third lives beyond anything imagined by the welders who built them in haste. A few were preserved floating museums that allow visitors to walk the decks where ordinary workers forged history. People touch the steel, imagining the hands that welded it, the oceans it crossed, the missions it completed. They see a vessel that carried victory not through aggression, but through persistence. For Germany, the aftermath told a different story. The submarines that once terrified nations now rested silent at the bottom of the sea. The strategy that nearly choked a continent became a cautionary lesson. Never underestimate the industrial strength of a united people. British leaders reflected on how close they came to collapse in the early war years. Without the Liberty ship, Britain might not have survived long enough to launch the offensives that eventually crushed Nazi rule in Europe. History hinged on steel plates welded in American shipyards. The Liberty ship was more than a vessel. It was proof that logistics could win a war. It was proof that ordinary citizens could wield extraordinary power when organized toward a single goal. And it was proof that a nation's true strength is not always in the battlefield, but in its factories, docks, and determination. As decades passed, only a few Liberty ships remained afloat, each carrying stories etched into rivets and weld seams. They remain reminders of a time when the future depended on how quickly a ship could touch water. The workers rarely saw the war directly. They did not hear the sonar pings in the Atlantic. They did not feel the fear of torpedoes slicing beneath waves. But they understood that the war needed them perhaps more than any soldier on the front line. The aftermath of the Liberty ship program was not only victory, it was transformation. America emerged from the war as the world's leading industrial and logistical power. Trade routes expanded, economic influence spread, and the lesson learned remained simple. The ability to build, to supply, to deliver is the ability to shape history. Today, the ocean still holds many Liberty ships in silence. Their presence beneath the waves marks the path of victory. Their remains are part of the seabed, a vast underwater memorial to workers who turned raw materials into the most powerful supply chain the world had ever seen. Their legacy is measured not just in ships or steel, but in the freedom that followed. The war ended sooner because Liberty ships kept the fight alive. Peace lasted longer because Liberty ships kept the world connected. Their job was never glamorous, their shape was never elegant, but in the greatest struggle of the 20th century, they were everything the world required. Even now, historians and engineers look back on them and see a truth that defined the outcome of a global war. Power is not only the ability to destroy, power is the ability to build faster than the enemy can destroy. History often celebrates the battles won by bullets and bravery. It remembers the soldiers who charged beaches and the pilots who fought above the clouds. But sometimes, victory belongs to those who never set foot on a battlefield, those who carried the weight of war in welding gloves and steel-toed boots, those who built not to destroy, but to sustain. The Liberty ships were never glamorous. They were practical, plain, almost awkward in appearance. They lacked the sleekness of cruisers or the majesty of battleships. But the enemy did not fear elegance. The enemy feared endurance. And endurance is what these ships delivered every day they touched the water. War, at its core, is a contest of will. The nation that outlasts the other survives. The nation that delivers more, supports more, supplies more, that nation shapes the ending. The Liberty ship took this simple truth and carried it across the ocean thousands of times. Behind every ship was a story. A welder helping after working a farm all morning, a woman who learned to use a torch while her husband fought overseas, a teenager who lied about his age to join the line because he could not stand waiting, a retired craftsman who returned because he felt his country needed one more pair of hands. They all stood under the glare of shop lights, breathing the heat of molten metal, knowing each spark mattered. They did not know the names of the soldiers their ships supplied. They did not know where the cargo would land or which battle it would affect. Yet their work pushed armies forward. Their effort helped free cities under occupation. Their precision and sweat helped turn the war's tide from desperation to dominance. The Liberty ship proved that a weapon does not need to fire a shot to decide a war. Sometimes, a weapon is steel moving across water faster than an enemy can react. German officers who once believed in U-boat supremacy learned to fear what they could not sink fast enough. They realized the truth too late. The ocean they tried to close had opened wider than ever before, filled with ships launched by a country that refused to slow down. The Battle of the Atlantic was not won by luck. It was won by organization, innovation, sacrifice, and the determination of millions who refused to allow tyranny to control the sea. When the war finally ended, Liberty ships continued another mission: rebuilding, carrying hope instead of ammunition, feeding families instead of front lines, proving that steel once shaped for war could help secure peace. Time, however, spares nothing. Many of those ships eventually reach their final journeys. Their hulls rest now beneath calm waters or in scrapyards where torches once again cut through steel. But their legacy does not rust with them. Their legacy sails in every modern cargo vessel that crosses vast oceans. It lives in every logistic chain that keeps nations supplied. It exists in the knowledge that the power to build can defeat the power to destroy. The workers who constructed these ships never asked for fame. Their memorials are not statues, but freedom itself. Their contribution remains woven into the history of every nation that survived, because supplies arrived on time, because food reached ports, because ammunition reached troops, because tanks reached battlefields. In the silence of a museum ship's deck, you can almost hear the echoes of shipyard whistles, the laughter and exhaustion of welders at the end of a long shift, the weight of responsibility felt by those who knew that every mistake could cost lives an ocean away. You can feel the pride in the steel beneath your feet, a reminder of what ordinary people achieved when history demanded extraordinary effort. The Liberty ship teaches one lesson above all others. When a nation unites behind a purpose, even the impossible becomes routine. A ship that took months to build became a ship that took weeks. Weeks became days, and those days became the difference between defeat and victory. The German officers who once laughed at American production promises stopped laughing when the ocean turned grey with the silhouettes of Liberty ships. They understood then that this was not just steel and machinery, this was resolve made visible. This was the force that would defeat them. War ends when one side cannot continue. America ensured that the Allies never reached that point. The Liberty ships made sure the fight always had fuel, had food, had force. They were not built to be admired. They were built to win, and they did.